Welcome to Issues of the Heart. Have you experienced anger, jealousy, anxiety, depression, marital storms or difficulties? Maybe struggling with self-control? Well, you're not alone, and we're here to help. We deal with these issues and more on Issues of the Heart. It's a weekly broadcast hosted by Jay Albright and a variety of guests, where we examine biblical remedies to those issues of the heart. Stay tuned for this week's episode. Welcome to Issues of the Heart, episode number 6. We're going through anchors and stormy relationships, and as we've said before, we'll say again, if you're married, if you're in a relationship, you're either going to go through a storm, you've been through a storm, or you're currently in one. And so what we want to do is we want to give you some anchors to throw out when those storms begin to come and the winds blow hard. We said before, and I'll say it again this week, that sometimes those storms start with just a small south breeze. It may not seem like a big issue, and one of the things we're going to talk about today is that very thing. So we've covered several anchors, and somebody said, well, which anchors, when you're going through this, which anchors do you think are the most vital anchors when you're having any kind of a marital conflict or storm? And I'll say that I don't know which ones would be the most valuable for you to throw out. Because remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to just be still. And when these storms come, you can't go forward, you can't go backward, to the right, or to the left, or you're bound to be shipwrecked. So just be still. Throw out an anchor, stop where you are until, as a couple, you devise a plan to conquer the storm. So, again, I can't say which one I think is the most valuable because I think that it depends on the storm you're going through. It depends on what your problem is, what difficulties. And I will say this, a lot of storms, come because of things that have happened in the past. It could be something from your heritage even. It could be a generational thing. It could be any number of things. Some storms come because we bring the storm on ourselves. We cause the problem. Some storms come because other people start the storm, and then some storms are just allowed because God allows it to make us as a person who He wants us to be. So I don't know what your circumstances are, so I can't tell you which anchor would be the most vital. What I can tell you is we're going to give you about 20 anchors. And the reason is because no matter what the storm is that you're going through in your relationship or marriage, I promise you one of these 20 anchors will help steady the ship, stop the ship, and give you time for resolution. Sometimes it's more than one anchor you can use. All I know is you'll have 20 anchors to look at when you're going through a battle and contemplate which one you should throw out, if not several of them, in that stormy battle. The one that we're going to cover tonight, this is one that I think will be the anchor you're going to want to throw out in almost every storm you face, no matter what the storm is. When we're counseling couples, this is one of those areas that we see in almost every single counseling session. Every couple, this is something we see the evidence of. And so I'm going to tell you, this anchor, the one we're going to cover tonight, is the anchor that everybody needs to throw out to stop the ship in a battle. This is the anchor of surrender. The anchor of surrender. The Bible said in Luke chapter 2, verse number 16, for all that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. Every marital conflict I know of has at least one of those three things in it. Sometimes those conflicts have all three of those. The lust of the flesh. Trouble starts because of the lust of the flesh. And I'm not just talking about sexual lust. It could be lust for power. It could be lust for attainment. It could be lust for prestige. It could be lust for whatever. Then there is the lust of the eyes, wanting the things you see. Again, it doesn't have to be anything of a sexual nature. Sometimes it is. But it could be wanting what your workmates have, or seeing what your neighbor has and wanting that, or seeing what another family member has and wanting that. So that's the lust of the eyes. But then this last one, the pride of life. Now I want to tell you tonight, every problem or every marital conflict we see as a result of those three things, at least one of the three, maybe all, but every one we see almost always has the pride of life. So that leads me into this next anchor, the anchor of surrender. Luke chapter 14, verse number 11 says, for whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humble himself shall be exalted. Let me ask you a question. How many people are listening to the sound of my voice or are watching this podcast will say, well, you know what, that's Jay, that's something I've battled. I mean, that whole pride thing, I've had to deal with that. Now, I'm going to tell you, most people who are dealing with self-exaltation don't even see it on the surface. They don't even realize it. So I'm going to share some things with you. After counseling couples, I've noticed that after the first session, or maybe the second session, you can begin to put your hand on the key ingredient that started the conflict to begin with. So, most marriage problems begin with either of the two desiring to be right, either he or she, and the motivator is selfishness. Self-exaltation is the big problem. I'm telling you, I believe this with all my heart. Remember, our podcast is Issues of the Heart. This comes straight from the heart. I believe this, that if you could eliminate selfishness in a relationship, you would probably eliminate most every other factor that will present itself. Selfishness, self-exaltation. So when the storm begins to blow, the storm begins to get rough, the ship begins to toss, you need to throw out the anchor of surrender and just be still and get your bearings. Throw out the anchor of surrender. Say, what in the world are you talking about? I mean, I was raised learning, man, you don't ever give up. You just keep on. You don't quit. You just keep on. You don't surrender. You just keep fighting. So what in the world, Jay, are you talking about? Throw out the anchor of surrender. Well, Webster says selfishness is being concerned exclusively and excessively with oneself or one's own advantage or success or pleasure or welfare. So, self-exhortation or selfishness is being consumed with yourself. Selfishness is the opposite of selflessness. Now, if I were to ask you, anybody who's listening to my voice, if I were to ask you, which one do you think is the greater contributor to a successful relationship, selfishness or selflessness? Probably everybody listening would say, well, certainly selflessness. But you realize that selflessness is the opposite of selfishness. You can't have both at the same time. You're selfish or you're selfless. You're selfish or you're selfless. Now, while you're listening right now, you're thinking, well, I think he's exactly right. My husband is very selfish. Or my wife is very selfish. But wait a minute, wait. What about you? What about me? Am I the one that's selfish? Is there an element of selfishness in me? Now, there may be an element of selfishness in my wife, but is there selfishness in me? And if there is that my real problem? Selfishness is a battle that all of us have at some point in our life. If you tell me tonight, look, selfishness is not something that I battle, I'm going to tell you that you're being less than honest. Selfishness is a battle all of us face at some point in our life. This is a battle. When I first started studying this years ago, this is a battle that I thought was a battle that men fought. Men can be egotistical and selfish and self-exalting. And boy, I used to, when I would meet with people back years ago before I was even counseling, I would say, you know what? He's a guy, and I can almost guarantee you his problem is selfishness, self-exaltation. Now, I will tell you now that I think that it is more prominent in men than women. I can see it more in men than women, but I still see it in women. Women can be just as selfish, but they carry it differently, and so it's not as readily noticeable. Remember what we talked about before when we were talking about conversation. We men, we just, excuse me for saying it this way, but we're just so dumb, we just say it. Remember I told you most men tell me, well, I just say what I think, and I respond by saying, no, you say before you think, and that's where the problem comes from. But women still think it, but they handle it a little different. You'll love this. We'll do this on one of these podcasts. We'll talk about manipulation and intimidation. I have a philosophy. I believe it's a right philosophy. I think I can prove it's a right philosophy. I can't prove it biblically that it's a right philosophy. But my philosophy is this: men control through intimidation. Men are intimidators. It can be physical intimidation. I'm bigger than you. It can be physical intimidation in that I can whip you. I'm stronger than you. I'm tougher than you. You're my wife. You do what I say, or else. It can be in the workplace. It can be intimidation as not as aggressive as that. It could be something like, well, you know, I've been doing this for 35 years. That's intimidation. I've been doing this long enough. I have to know what I'm doing. You don't. That's intimidation. So men tend to control and rule through intimidation. Women, on the other hand, they don't control and rule through intimidation. They control through manipulation. Okay, so they can use the humble effect to produce a prideful result. Manipulation. How many times on the job have you seen different authority figures get manipulated by women in the workforce? How many times have you seen husbands get manipulated through a wife who knows the art of manipulation very well. Manipulation. Okay, so now that I've got you stirred up about that, we'll cover that on another podcast. Can men manipulate? Absolutely, they can. Can women intimidate? Absolutely, they can. But I'm saying the strength of the woman is manipulation. The strength of the man is intimidation. Anyway, a side product of that, or where that comes from, is self-exaltation. How can I promote myself? You say, what in the world, Jay, does that have to do with a marriage problem? You know, whether we can promote ourselves or build ourselves up, how does that all fit together? Well, selfishness is a battle that all of us have to face at some point in our life. Self-exaltation is a relationship killer. Because everything in the relationship becomes about you. Self-exaltation is a relationship killer because everything in the relationship becomes about you. On the job, people say, I always have to prove myself. And I always ask, well, is the real problem that you always have to prove yourself? Or is the real problem that you have exalted yourself so much that other people don't see how important you really are or how great you really are? And that bothers you that they don't see you the way you see yourself? Or they don't see how successful you are? Or they don't see how smart you are? I don't mean to step on toes, but could that be the real problem? Self-exaltation? Because remember, it is a relationship killer. It's a relationship killer on the job. It's a relationship killer in the church oftentimes. It's a relationship killer in marriages and in relationships. I mean, after all, isn't a successful relationship the art of building someone else up? If it is, then self-exaltation doesn't fit. When's the last time you or your husband or your wife were out and you had a conflict, and the conflict wasn't anything serious, it wasn't a big deal, it wasn't anything that should have ruined the evening or ruined the day or put both on edge? It wasn't anything like, it wasn't life or death, it wasn't about something that could change history. It wasn't something at the foundation of your marriage. It wasn't something at the foundation of your marriage problems. But it was something very simple. Very simple. Something that didn't even matter. You just simply had a disagreement. But then self-exaltation stepped in. And now all of a sudden, a simple, unnecessary, ridiculous thought or activity ended in a fuss or an argument that ruined the night, maybe the day, maybe even carried over for several days. So ridiculous that a week later, neither could remember what the situation was. But something really simple was blown completely out of proportion because of self-exaltation. You see, when you throw out the anchor of surrender, what you need to do when the storms come and the battle come, and maybe a little simple thought turn disastrous because of this pride factor, the selfishness, you need to throw out the anchor of surrender, and you throw the anchor out by saying this: I will give up something I want for the sake of those over me and for the sake of those under me. I will give up something I want for the sake of those over me and the sake of those under me. Husband, maybe it's worth your while to give something up. Wife, maybe it's worth your while. Maybe it's worth your relationship to give something up. Is that thing that the fuss started with worth risking a relationship over? I mean, really, is it worth ruining the afternoon for? Ruining the evening? Is it worth going to bed angry for? Selfishness got involved. The water started churning deep and rough and hard. The ship started getting tossed, and you must throw out the anchor. Stop where you are. Throw out the anchor of surrender. You see, the humbler we become, the more exalted we are by other people. But the more exalted we make ourselves, the less exalted we are with other people. In a relationship and even on the job. And I want to tell you, when you are practicing self-exaltation, that sticks with people. It sticks with a mate. It sticks with a husband. And it takes a long time for them to get to the point where they accept your humility in place of your pride. The job is a tough one for me. And it's a tough one for me because I spend a lot of time developing programs, safety programs, to increase our safety culture on our job. And we have locations all over the country, have about 15,000 employees. And so a good safety culture is necessary. I mean, come on, my phone rings off the wall when a lack of safety has been exhibited. But something that gives me heartburn is when someone, other than following the program, they look at the program and they come to me and they say, well, you know, Jay, I think I have a program over here that'll work better. I think if we do this, it'll work better. Let's try it. And my response is usually, well, look, why don't you try what we already have in place? Try that first. If it doesn't work, then we can talk about it and consider something different. I've thought about that a lot. Does that mean that they don't have a great idea? No. Unfortunately for me, you know what that really means? It really means that Jay Albright is having a problem with self-exaltation. And because everybody doesn't see it Jay's way, and they don't see Jay's greatness in writing this program, something must be wrong with him. You think that happens in the marriage? A father once said to his son, you can be right or you can be happy. He said when he got to be an adult and had a marriage of his own and been married for 25 years on 25th anniversary, he said, look, he said, my dad told me that. He said, I want to tell you, he said, I hadn't been right in 25 years, but I'm a happy, happy, happy man. Self-exaltation, is being right that important? that you would sacrifice your relationship for it? Are you so concerned about being right that you would risk your relationship? Decide to serve versus being served. I'm going to tell you, it's hard for people to see you in a negative way if you're a person of service. Rarely have I ever heard anyone talk about someone who serves others in a negative way. They always come back to, man, that guy really cares about people. That guy really loves his wife. I love out when we're out in the public, well, all the time. My wife and I have a deal. I told her when we first got married, I said, look, babe, I said, I'll open your door every time we're out. But when it's 20 degrees below zero, either get in fast or it's every man for himself. But it's funny when we're out, and it never fails. I'll open my wife a car door for her, and people will be sitting in cars, and I can't tell you, and we get tickled about it, but I can't tell you how many times my wife has watched the woman in the other car hit her husband on the arm or nudge her husband, or see a husband look at his wife and shake his head, because they want that. Their wife wants that, because that's part of serving. By the way, can I tell you, in Galatians chapter 5, verse 13, for brethren, ye have been called unto liberty, only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. Our pastor at our church stresses serving others constantly. Serving others, serving others, serving others. And he does that. What was the goal when you got married? Was it to serve or be served? Remember, genuine service and selfishness cannot co-inhibit the same person. You're going to have one or the other. Service and selfishness cannot co-inhibit the same person. So let me ask you, husband, what kind of husband are you? Are you a husband who serves or who wants to be served? Wife, do you want to be served or do you want to serve? Remember, when the storms come, regardless of the reason for the storm, throw out that anchor of surrender and just be still. Remember, I will give up something I want for the sake of those over me and for the sake of those under me. It's not about